Hello and welcome everyone to today's session. I'm Christine Evanko with Motivity, and we are very excited to bring you this future-focused presentation. Our platform serves as the backbone for data collection across 300 amazing organizations. And since joining Motivity in 2016, I've been super amazed at how this company has addressed technology and strived to make the most of it. We're backed by the National Institute of Health grants. We're the only data collection company that I know of who has NIH grant backing. It's designed really to get the most out of data collection. So if you're curious to know how, then stay tuned after our discussion because Kara Lechleiter, our amazing director of sales, will give you a sneak peek and a quick 10-minute demo. Now, normally Motivity provides CEUs for presentations on Behavior Live, but this one does not qualify. However, we are confident that your time is not going to be wasted. One more thing I want to mention, if you would like for our presenter or our host to address something specifically or answer your question, please use the question button below, not the chat function, and you'll be able to vote for questions that you want to have answered if you don't have any of your own. But feel free to use the chat feature to, well, chat. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brian Curley, who's Motivity's Chief Creative Officer, who will be your host. Take it away, Brian.
Thanks, Christy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Future Focus. I'm the Chief Creative Officer here at Motivity, and I've been in the ABA space, software space now since 2015. And I really wanted to start shedding some light on some of the amazing pieces of technology that have come into the market over the past 3 or 4 years. I really feel like we're in some sort of technology renaissance within ABA, if you will, and it's really exciting to witness. Future Focus is meant to give a platform for these technologies to have more of a long-form way of discussing and communicating their contributions to ABA within the software. So we want to allow them to dive deep into their backgrounds, their values, their mission, all while explaining how they're shaping the market of ABA. So we're going to try to do things a little bit differently here. Each guest company on Future Focus has been asked to prepare only 5 slides for this presentation. So this allows ample time for Q&A and conversation. They are allowed to be as creative as possible with these slides and use them however they wish. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest on Future Focus, Zach Rosen, CEO of Brellium.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Brellium, real quick, is a technology platform that lets you instantly audit 100% of your session notes as soon as they are submitted to your EHR. They allow you to instantly screen 100% of your charts for signatures within 24 hours of session, proper amount of goals, per hour build, note and timesheet matching, and thousands more. So, Zach, go ahead and share your screen on slide 1. We always start with the same question, which I'd like to say is, what are you focusing on for the future of ABA?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Brian mentioned, I'm Zach. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Brellium. So Brellium is a technology platform that's focused on automating manual chart review specifically for ABA clinics. How we see this moving forward is that current manual auditing for most clinics is super manual and super inefficient. We see that most folks are pretty frequently only able to actually put eyes on a really small fraction of their documentation, which leads to a bunch of billing issues down the line on the clinic's end, but also more importantly, leads to a bunch of clinical quality issues. Because in general, especially if you do a bunch of sessions, you're not really sure what's actually going on a day-to-day basis, and you're not super sure how to give your RBTs and BCBAs feedback on how to improve. So our goal here at Brellium is to help give you actionable feedback to go back to your RBTs and BCBAs and say, hey, you should work on 1, 2, and 3 things, and here's exactly how to do that. So the errors that happened yesterday don't happen again tomorrow and moving forward.
Right. So at your, from like a very high level, let's just talk auditing real quick. Are you seeing organizations do kind of spot audits, or are they doing daily, every single employee type of audit checks, or something in between?
It really depends on the actual center. So we'll see some folks that are startup centers, especially when they have some kind of scar tissue built up from previous experiences with audits and clawbacks. Those folks pretty frequently, especially from the very beginning, will literally audit every single session note prior to billing. So it's a really robust process. But as you scale, that gets harder and harder to do. So let's say that you're seeing 1,000 kiddos. It's really hard to actually fully go through and audit each of those session notes. So usually somewhere along that trajectory of growth, we see folks start scaling a bit down. So we'll see them audit half of their session notes and then maybe 10% and then kind of go from there.
Yeah. And you're seeing things like are you able to kind of spot check maybe, problem employees, problem RBTs or improper, clinical write-ups or something to that effect that are kind of more of a manual process?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty frequently we'll see, especially with new RBTs that have just finished up training, that occasionally some of the requirements, and quite honestly, some of the requirements are quite complex, especially when you're just getting into a brand new job. We see folks having some trouble with things like making sure that a session narrative is fully accurate and fully complete and doesn't include things like, for example, ADLs, which generally folks just need a bit of prompting, need to understand basically what to do right. So stuff like that, where it's basically more of the unstructured text side that would normally be really, really, really hard for human beings to manually look at so many session notes, we're able to do at scale with technology to basically let instead humans focus their time on, okay, cool. We know exactly what's wrong and we know exactly how it should be done. So now let's go and have a human interaction one-to-one and help these RBTs and BCBs improve down the line.
Right. Gotcha. Well, you said humans and human beings quite a bit there. So I think on your first slide, we should probably dive into kind of the opposite of that and what you guys kind of have going for you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pop my my screen up here. All right. Awesome. Can you guys see this here?
Got it.
Cool. Super cool. All right. So to kick things off, let's first start with what is AI? I know that especially over the last year, 18 months or so, it gets thrown around quite a bit. AI is everywhere. Is AI taking over the world? Whatever it may be. And what we find is that, especially when we're speaking with folks that are a bit newer to the technology side of things, is that they've heard of AI but don't really know what it does. So wanted to first start off with basically what the evolution of AI is up until now, why you're all of a sudden hearing about it so much over the last year when it's been around for 60 plus years at this point, and what AI products you're currently using as kind of a starter kit to what things look like moving forward. So at its core, AI is really taking a bunch of information on what's happened in the past and taking its best guess at what happens next up. The very first beginnings of this technology was initially built in the 1950s. And I'll get into in a second why you're seeing so much more of it now, especially over the last 18 months. One of the AI products that you've likely used almost every day for the past few years is autocorrect and suggestions when you're texting on your iPhone or your Android phone. So if you've ever noticed when you're typing out a text to a friend, and you'll see those three different options of what to type in next, that is AI suggesting what's next up. And it's doing that by taking a look at what you've typed in previously in the message, also what you've sent in previous messages, and taking its best guess at what you might type next. So the key point here is that it's not like your iPhone is thinking or really processing anything that's super, super insane. It's basically just taking its best guess at the next word that comes in the sequence. When we're talking about AI now, and really when everything's gone crazy over the last 18 months or so, the reason why you hear about it all the time is because ChatGPT came out. And ChatGPT is a derivation, basically the next evolution of AI. And it's built on a technology called large language models, or LLMs. So think of this as kind of the iPhone or Android next word suggestion, basically on steroids and then on steroids again, where it can basically guess the next word that comes in the sequence and then use that word and what came before to guess the next word after that, and after that, and after that, and after that, until what you get is it looks like a complete thought, but really under the hood, the computer is just guessing what happens next, and it's just gotten really, really, really good at it over the last 18 months, which is kind of cool. So how this actually works under the hood and how the computer knows which words to guess next is that it's basically seen a bunch of words before. So what it's done historically, and what companies like OpenAI and Mistral and Google that have built these large language models like ChatGPT and Gemini have done, is they've basically gone all around the internet to blogs, to forums like Reddit, news sources like the New York Times, etc. And they basically downloaded a bunch of words. And they use all of those words to figure out, all right, when a human is typing out a sentence and they put in something like the sky is, what's the next word most likely to be? So when you ask a question like what color is the sky to something like ChatGPT, it'll go back into its database. It'll say, okay, it seems like the most likely first word in that response is going to be the word the. So we're going to give that to you. And then, okay, with what color is the sky and the first word of the, what's the next most likely word? That might be sky. And so that's how you get a piece by piece breakdown of what the answer response fragment might be. Whereas what it looks like to you at the end is what color is the sky? The sky is blue. The computer is really breaking individual chunks and giving you back essentially each word one by one. And kind of the whole...
And this thing's training as you go, correct?
Not
like as you're entering information, is it learning as you go or no?
Not quite as you go. Training is more of a point in time. The reason why is it's super computationally expensive and also cache-wise intensive to basically crunch a bunch of data and make sure it's cleaned up enough to basically actually train the model. So real-time training for things like even ChatGPT at this point isn't super, super realistic. It's more point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So what you can do, though, which makes it look like it's being trained, is you can basically add what's called additional context to your responses. So, for example, if you ask ChatGPT or another large language model, what color is the sky? And then it says the sky is blue, and you look outside and you're like, oh, it's dark outside, it's nighttime. Then you can add additional context and you say, oh, it's actually 8 p.m. in New York City where I am. And then ChatGPT will take that additional information and say, oh, since it's 8 p.m., I'll look at what other databases have said before. Oh, the sky is probably black at this point because it's nighttime. And so that makes it kind of make the results a bit more accurate to your individual situation.
I got it. Yep. So I guess you guys have used something like this in some training things, which we're going to go over. Just kind of like pie in the sky, where do you see, like, what's your first inclination of where you see something like this in the ABA space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess medium term and then also end game here, we see this as the best assistant for ABA professionals that you could possibly dream up. We don't ever see this being a replacement for ABA therapy or providers. One, from a technical standpoint, it's not really feasible. And then number two, from a quality of care standpoint, would anyone even want that if it really was feasible? But when it comes to, hey, I have a kid coming in today. Here's basically what's happened historically. I'm a little bit unsure of how to handle XYZ situation. Can you help? As an assistant, LLMs are absolutely incredible at it. And there are a bunch of other applications like what we're working on the back end side of things. But really in ABA, the coolest thing that we see is basically an assistant, a helper, a co-pilot to ABA professionals to help them treat kids better.
Sure. And those kind of trainings, the more you can kind of get it to have a little bit more context, the better the response, right? So the more information it has, the more accurate the response might be.
Yep, exactly. So I would, as an example, I would flip that back to just like someone who is fresh out of school versus someone who's been in the field for 15, 20 years. Someone fresh out of school, they know a little bit. But once you've been trained over time, you've been in the field for 15, 20 years, you've accumulated so much information that when you see a new situation, you're like, I've seen a bunch of similar things before. I pretty much know what to do here.
Sure.
I put it almost identical here, where it's the more information, the more reps you basically give it, then over time it gets better and better at giving you back what you want.
Sure. Okay. So how has Brellium kind of used this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've focused on a really, really, really narrow use case, which is chart review. So as we touched on a couple of minutes ago, usually before folks start working with Brellium, is that they'll have a team of folks. Sometimes they're BCBAs or RBTs that have transitioned to the ops side of things. Sometimes they've just kind of moved around the ops side, and they're in charge of auditing session notes basically day by day. So RBT and BCBA will submit a note. A few days later, they'll go through it, make sure it fits all of the clinic's individual requirements, and then say, all right, let's build this. Or actually, wait, we got to fix some stuff before we do. RBT, BCBA, come fix it. So super manual process, takes a bunch of back and forth. What we do is a center will come to us, and one time they'll copy and paste in their list of requirements. And then every single session note that their RBTs or BCBAs will generate will automatically screen with language models like what we're seeing right here. And we'll say automatically, all right, 90% of your notes, perfect, good to bill, no problems. 10%, here's some errors. And then we'll fire those back to an RBT or BCBA with exact instructions on how to fix. So basically the issues get less frequent over time because everyone knows now exactly what needs to be in each piece of documentation.
Okay. So what does that training look like? Like for something like a summary, right? How does your system know what's a good summary versus a lackluster one?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of nuance here because really the real answer is that it depends on the individual center and how the center has been doing it for the lifetime of the business. But high level, generally what we see most folks look for is a specific length in the session. So usually folks will correlate that to how long the session is. So for example, if you see a kid for 6 hours, a one-line sentence usually isn't the best. And we'll also see things like the session note not being copy and pasted specifically in the narrative, things like ADLs not being present, language not relative to ABA therapy. So for example, we went to the park or the zoo and played Xbox and had a great time all day. That's nice and fun, but probably not the best for a session note, as well as kind of individual instances of behavior either noted by the provider or on the kiddo's end that might not be exactly what the center wants to see, stuff like that. So it's pretty holistic and it's a bunch of different requirements, but it does differ a little bit from center to center.
Okay, and you said copy and paste. So does that mean you're constantly referencing historical ones as well?
Yeah, that's correct. So that's a bit of a clinical requirement and then a bit more weighted on the payer side of things is that in general, you don't want a provider just cut and pasting narrative to narrative because you want to make sure that each kid's being taken care of individualized. So for that, we'll basically, I can get into it if helpful, but you basically run like a somewhat complex statistical view of how each word is structured in each session narrative and compare that against previous session narratives. And if it's too similar, then we'll say, ooh, it looks like this one's copy and pasted, and we'll flag that back to you as an error.
Got it. So how many of those really kind of like unique use case type things like that have you guys built into this little training thing that you have? Do you have other things like that? I'm sure there's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be thousands, maybe tens of thousands at this point.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting because in theory, every center. So let's say that you have a center that's billing the same payer. Let's say it's TRICARE in the same state. Let's say it's Georgia. Center A and Center B, they should have pretty much the exact same screening requirements. But what we see is that their requirements night and day are completely different because everyone's done it generally their way for a while. They've kind of seen what works and what doesn't work individually for them with different audits and clinical requirements, and that's just how it is. So we've probably built in thousands, maybe tens of thousands at this point, individual screening criteria to match every clinic that we work with's individual requirements.
I see. I see. So every clinic has its own individual requirements that you're not sharing them across payers or anything like that, or referencing anything that maybe, hasn't been refused for certain payers, and you're sharing any information across organizations.
So we will provide suggestions. We'll say, hey, for example, we recommend that for this specific payer that you have a BCBA co-sign the note and you add that in as a requirement. But there are always suggestions. Basically, what we generally see is, let's say it's the clinical director at the center of auditing. That person has been auditing has been their domain for the last 10 years. They know it cold, and generally we do it their way because they've done it for a while and their way works. So we'll say, hey, we think you should do this, but at the end of the day, it's their call.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. All right, let's hop to the next slide.
Cool. Awesome. Sweet. So we touched on this a tiny bit, but basically, what does ABA mean for me if I'm working in ABA? Either if I'm directly providing services or if I'm on the ops side of things. Really kind of the core takeaway that I'd love for you to kind of walk away from this chat with is that AI is really, really, really good at being an assistant for you and helping you out, but it's really not great at thinking, which is cool because that's what human beings are really awesome at and generally like to do the most. So as a tangible example, let's say that you're not really sure how you should document ADLs in your session narrative, or if you should, then going to a free tool like ChatGPT is really awesome, because what ChatGPT will do is it'll look at other databases it's seen and it'll provide you a recommendation on what to do. Should you take that word for gospel? Absolutely not. But is it a great suggestion to get your brain jogging and get you kicked off? Absolutely. Saves you a ton of time. You don't have to ask supervisors and Google around. It's just right there, gives you an answer in like 10 seconds. But as an assistant, not thinking for you. So for example, let's say that you're on the ops side of things and you have a couple of centers, you're looking at broadening up to another state. What would be a really bad example of something that a large language model could help out with is, hey, I want to expand my footprint and I want to go to a couple different states. Which state should I choose? It's going to give you back an answer, but that answer is generally not going to be anything close to what you actually should do. And the reason why is that there are so many variables to take into play. Again, that's why it's better to think on something like this that's a harder problem that the language model is not going to be able to take into account. So for example, things like rates, demographics, competition, basically like what other folks are doing, what services in the area, stuff like that. That's a really, really hard problem that if you need kind of bits and pieces of it, help with thinking through that, ChatGPT is really good at. But giving you that answer, really, really, really not so good at, which is cool because the thinking stuff is fun. And that's kind of what we're put on the plan to do.
Right. So how have you seen any pushback from payers regarding information that could come from tools like ChatGPT, especially things like summaries?
Yeah, so I would say the short answer is no. The longer answer is that over time, potentially. So I know that there are a bunch of tools that are coming out right now, specifically AI scribes. So it's basically you speak into a microphone, spits out a session note that's being created by AI. You do a quick once over, make any edits that you need, and then pop it in. So something like that. Right now, the tech's still a bit early, and we haven't seen too many folks roll it out yet. So on our end, we haven't seen payers complain about it yet. Down the line, though, I wouldn't be surprised either way. What we're also seeing with Brellium and with other folks who are working on other derivations of AI products in ABA is that payers are pretty excited about this stuff coming out too, right? Because you got to think about it. If on the clinic's end, documentation is airtight, less issues on claims, stuff like that, that also makes the payers' lives easier too. So we think that there is a happy medium here where basically technology is used on both ends of the spectrum to build kind of more of a balance than there is right now.
Sure. I could see that on one side, and I could also see them kind of pushing back, especially on things like, hey, here's the data I took today in this 3-hour session, and then AI writes up your summary for you, to where the funding source says, no, that needs to be a human writing that. Like, what kind of tools are out there, or are there to detect something like that? That's like, is something written in AI? Like,
Yes and no. There have been a bunch of different academic studies that have rolled out on if things can detect, kind of like plagiarism detection. Can something detect
right,
if an AI writes this or not? The kind of loose answer here is that, especially over time, as large language models get better, it's not going to be very feasible. So over time, it's going to be pretty close to how a human would write it. Even now, I mean, let's look at like that logic path is that a pair comes back to the center and goes, hey, we think these notes are AI generated. We need you to fix them. And the center says they weren't. They were written by a provider. And then what happens next? So it's a bit of a tricky kind of back and forth there if it was viewed a bit more negatively. And even in that case, too, at the center's end, if you did choose to go the AI generated session note route, you can also have your BCBAs and RBTs kind of QA them as you should and introduce a bit more flavor
right.
to individualize them too. So whichever way this shakes out on the payer's end over time, pretty confident there is a pretty happy medium here, because at the end of the day, this does help folks on both sides of the aisle out.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's good to know that they're not pushing back too strongly right now, because I know there are some like very basic just summation tools, that are out there that kind of do what we're saying, um, that provide a huge value. Especially if you have the raw data and you know what's happening, and you can answer some very basic questions on, how was he feeling when you walked in the room? How could you tell? What were some actions that were happening? And you can form a nice little summary paragraph at the beginning. Those are all good things, and if they're not pushing back too strongly, I think that's a positive sign. It's a little scary that it's going to get so good to where it's almost like, well, you wouldn't be able to tell anyways. But I guess that might lead us down another path. How do you answer the question of AI being scary?
Yeah, I think that I guess partially history and then partially let's play around with it now and kind of see what it looks like now. But if we take a step back and we look at the last 100, 150 or so years of human history, the argument of AI being scary can directly be applied to a bunch of different things. So it's factory lines in the Industrial Revolution, computers coming out in the 80s, internet coming out in the early 2000s. Each of those moments at the specific time was seen as, oh Lord, I've been doing this for so long. Is my job gone? Is my family going to be able to put food on the table? What's going on? And that was a quite valid point at the individual point in time. But when we take a look back and we have some hindsight here, what we realize is that not only were jobs net not lost, but that so many more jobs were created that were generally better quality for the human beings.
Right.
So, for example, do we have as many factory line workers anymore? No. But we have a lot more office workers now that those jobs didn't exist 50, 60, 100 years ago. And those office workers are free to use technology as a leverage point to think more and use their brains more, which generally has resulted in higher incomes, less stress on the body, more longevity, more job security, stuff like that, which is pretty awesome. So mapping that to where we're at today, again, let's look at what AI is good at. It's really, really good at helping you out. But pop in the question right after we hop off the chat here. I own an ABA center in Georgia. I'm thinking about expanding to other states. What should I do next? That's a really hard human problem to solve. Ask GPT. It's not going to give you a great answer because it's great at helping you arrive to answers, but thinking for you, which is the hard part, not there, which is cool because it frees up that for us.
Yeah, it'll definitely I like it in the aspect of a tool. It'll expand productivity, make you faster, better outputs, essentially. So I think that's really good. All right. Want to move to the next slide? You got anything else on this one?
Absolutely. Yeah, the kind of last that I'd make here is that we hear a lot of times even in our demos where we'll come to a team and they've got a bunch of folks doing quality reviews on their end. And really frequently, they're like, okay, guys, like, are you coming for my job here? What's going on? And I think that's a really important point to kind of spend some time thinking on, because kind of to your point, Brian, a few minutes ago, it's scary. You've been doing something for a while. All of a sudden, this new technology comes around. And you're like, okay, where does that leave me? The cool part here, over time, we think, is that AI technology as a whole strongly decreases the cost it takes to build almost anything. And especially in ABA, that correlates pretty directly to building new businesses, new centers to serve more kids, which is really, really, really neat. What that means to kind of where we're at right now is that a center that's, let's say, serving 500 kids, they may not need a QA team or a billing department or a recruiting department that's 15, 20, 30 folks anymore. But since it's so much less expensive now to spin up new centers and for BCBAs to go off on their own and build new clinics from scratch, each of those is going to need a QA lead and a billing lead and a recruiting lead, a staffing lead, stuff like that, which levels out the playing field so much more, creates so many more jobs for so many more people, and at the end of the day, creates a lot more care for kids that need it, which is really, really, really awesome. So definitely short-term changes, but longer term, we think it's really, really awesome that more kids will be able to be helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's more output for the same amount of people. So yeah, exactly. All around, I think it's a good thing. Yeah,
exactly. Just higher leverage. We pretty frequently get asked about the ethics of AI and ABA, in that as a human, you can pretty much make a gut call on if something feels right or it doesn't, and what you should do about it. But when we're using tools like AI, it gets a bit murkier, because folks are like, okay, is this thing thinking for me? Is that okay? Should I be handling the end output? Stuff like that. I think really the core here, and it goes to the core takeaway that I'd love for you to walk away from this, which is, am I outsourcing thinking to the AI, or am I using it as a tool to help me along and to help me think? If we take a step back and we go back to how language models are actually built, remember, it scraped a bunch of data from the internet, and it uses that to take a guess at what word or what sentence fragment should happen next. So AI knows kind of what's already out there before. But for example, when it comes to treating a kiddo, you know that kiddo better than anyone on the internet has ever written ever in their life. So it's really important that while you might use it to help you treat the kiddo, it probably isn't the best move to outsource how you think about it individually. So for example, use it as a tool, but don't use it basically like as the sole source of information to treat the kiddo moving forward. Other big points to take away. This is mostly on the center and the center leadership's end, is data security. So everyone gets nervous, very rightfully so, about what these AI companies are doing with your data. If we're taking a session and all of a sudden the kid's information, date of birth, etc., is popped into it, is that going to be put into someone else's output? That's really, really, really scary. And that's on the center's end and vendors like our end, to make sure that everything that we're doing is compliant and takes into account security, essentially above all here, which is really, really, really important to spend a bunch of time and thought on. Since AI is guessing the next word in a sentence that might come out, if PHI is put into it and the model is trained on that PHI, what happens if for a different center, a response includes a kiddo's name from center A? That's really not great. So it's really important for centers and tech vendors like us alike to make sure that everything is HIPAA compliant, that PHI is being handled properly, And that's not just validated by us and vendors like us, but also validated by external folks to make sure that basically everything is okay across the board.
Yeah, so from like a technology standpoint, what are you guys doing in that regard?
Yeah. So number one, and this is both kind of a moral and then a legal requirement, is that zero training happens on any data set with protected health information. And that's full stop, period. Like there's zero negotiation there whatsoever. That's kind of the big core. Going a bit deeper into it is making sure that all requests, so anytime the data is being sent or stored on the technology end, is to make sure that it's fully encrypted. So what that means is that even if someone with not so great intentions came in and tried to show up at the data center where our data is stored and snag the hard drive and break it open to grab PHI, is that data is completely illegible because it's encrypted. And that's both when it's being stored at rest and in transit. So those are kind of the two core points. There's a bunch of other information security points to take into account too. But really the big things are no training on PHI and making sure that everything is encrypted all the time.
So how do you, if there's no training on PHI with just like the instance of like the copy paste thing, like how do you distinguish what's PHI and what's not with something like that? It's using historical data you've entered, right? Like, is it siloed off in some way or?
Yep. It takes a ton of time and a ton of effort, but basically you have to go in and you have to strip out all protected health information full stop to make sure that zero of that is present in your data set.
Got it. So it's looking for matches or close matches minus any PHI information then.
That's correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, that sounds like a very difficult problem.
Yeah, and as it should be, right? It's a really important problem to solve. It's one of those things where if you get it right 99 times out of 100, that's not even close to good enough. So it makes sense to spend a lot of time on. But yeah, it's definitely something that we spend a lot of time on internally, and I know a bunch of other healthcare technology vendors also spend a ton of time on.
Mm-hmm. So how do you this is more of like a technology focused chat, so I feel like we can kind of dive a little deeper. So what's your training or I guess internal testing QA of your own product to kind of make sure that things like that aren't happening?
Yeah, good question. So there's a bunch of steps, and I guess I can kind of take you top to bottom. The first kind of big step is that for every single center that we work with, for them, it looks and it feels like they just put in their requirements, they click a button and everything, poof, it's all magic, and the AI just works perfectly and everything. But that couldn't be farther from the truth with what actually happens on our end. So on our end is that we have one of our implementation engineers, and we assign them to each individual center. And they spend, in some cases, a few days, in larger cases, a few weeks, building a completely custom integration for that individual center to make sure that one, security and compliance are taken into play, and then two, to make sure that everything's airtight. Because this is another example where getting it right 99 times out of 100, especially when you're working with a larger center that processes tens or hundreds of thousands of results every month, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
So it's got to be perfect. Once that happens, we have automated testing frameworks that are built in that essentially run stats against every piece of code that's pushed. If there are any errors that jump off the page, notifies the engineer to fix. Then we have two different levels of QA that happens with the engineering manager and the engineering leadership to make sure that everything's a thumbs up. And then the final one is that it goes back to the customer's QA team. And that's the really big test because they've been doing this for forever. If we don't get it perfect, they let us know. So that is the final test where if they have any issues, we go back and fix them and then push the integration live.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it seems like a very laborious process, but obviously necessary. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's for every new customer that comes on, for every new implementation that you do, your QA is getting better and better as well, which is nice. It kind of builds upon itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we might have the only engineering team in the world that's experts at both engineering and ABA quality assurance, which is a few years ago. If you would have told us that would be the case, I think we would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah, sure.
But it's been a lot of fun.
So, I do want to keep moving, just due to time, but I'm kind of interested a little bit on more of the predictive modeling stuff as well. I know we're talking about large language models, but how do you see that kind of stepping over the line into more of the data? So you give it a big raw data set and say, we can pull out things like trends and moving averages and things like that, but if the output is something that maybe we don't see, maybe it's a relative change, maybe it's something that says, hey, we see that every time on a Thursday, this always spikes, and maybe you can't see that in the view that you're looking at during the data, the way you're viewing things like that. How do you see kind of these predictive models fitting into ABA from more of like a raw data standpoint?
Yeah, I think that they're really neat when folks spend a ton of time and thought making sure that the data quality is perfectly clean to the point where your results are accurate. Getting to that point is really, really, really hard. I think that you have a couple of tech-enabled billing companies out there in ABA and otherwise that have done a really, really, really great job at using basically a bunch of kind of number data instead of the text data that folks like us use, at building these really cool statistical models that help predict things. And I think those are a pretty decent analog to the point that you're bringing up right here. But in short, it's hard to do. Really, the big thing with making sure that kind of your end output is accurate and usable is the data that you put in is one, good, and two, clean. That's hard. It's really hard. We've tried to do it ourselves too. I think that there are some really smart folks that are working on cracking it and making some good progress, but it's a super hard problem to solve.
Yeah. We see that, daily. We get raw data, tens of thousands of data points a day, and trying to figure out and pull out the value out of that, and then give it to a model that can give you some other sort of value that maybe you didn't see is extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's
I think
really tricky. Logically, kind of the things like data is the new oil from the 2010s. Logically, if you have access to all this data, you should be able to build this. But then once you actually get in the weeds of kind of when you're actually spending the days building out these complex models, it's hard. It's really, really hard. It takes a lot of time, and you're kind of hunting and pecking to try to get to something that has usable output that's actually helpful to folks that you're serving.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, you want to hop to, what's this? Are we on the last slide already?
I guess we are, yeah.
Oh, that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, our timing's pretty good. I guess we can bring back Christy, and we can kind of open it up to any questions that people might have. We can do like the last 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A if anyone has anything, or if there's anything else that you want to touch on.
We do have a question in the chat, and it's from Kara, who's our director of sales. But it's because we're all, it's especially at Motivity, we're all very interested, just being technology oriented and seeing kind of where this is going. So I don't know, Brian, if you want to go ahead and address her question.
Yeah, it's kind of the last question I asked him about the predictive raw data. That's kind of how we see it starting to fit a little bit into Motivity, which is, giving projections or, rough guidelines as to where we think something is going, or where an intervention might be a good place to, be entered. And that's all based off of historical information. So if we have all of the data on this one child that says, for the past 3, 4, 5 years, that says, hey, we've seen this happen after you do this consistently, right? We can start to build in those types of things. But again, just like you said, it's all in the suggestion route, right?
Yeah.
This is an aid. This is a tool. And that's a very, very difficult line we need to stay on the right side of, I think.
It's an interesting thinking about. I mean, I've had a long career. I've been working for 30 some years. And when I first started my career, which was not in behavior analysis, I was typing things on a typewriter. We didn't have very much. There was no internet. And to see sort of how things have come, and you always think, oh no, there's something that's coming, and it's giving us, it's going to take away these responsibilities from me and leave it open to this. I haven't found that my responsibilities have lessened over the last 30 years. It's like you keep finding more things to do. So I don't know that I feel like I'm afraid that, AI is going to take over our jobs. I think it is hopefully going to help us work smarter. And just free us up for more creative ways of thinking. But I really like how you discussed kind of in a way, how it works, the underground idea behind it. And I think a lot of us may be afraid of it. And then some of us are like disdainful of it, and that, you're having AI write something for you. But really it is a tool that we can use. Just like I no longer need to use that typewriter to type up a lease when I was, back then. I have other tools for me. I still somehow work 40 hours a week.
yeah, exactly. That's not going anywhere.
Imagine,
you just become more productive. Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that I love about, or that I use in my day-to-day routine, around the whole ChatGPT Bard type of product that's out there right now. I also use it on the day-to-day within some tools that I use, which are more like, image generation, things like that, is I like to use it as like a brainstorming partner. Mm-hmm. That's what I like it. So it's very good, I find, at coming up with ideas and sparking ideas and having an ongoing communication of, I like that. Let's go down that road and let's explore that. And you keep building ideas and keep building the ideas. I love it for that, because it's an aid. It's a tool. It's something I can use to spark my own creative energies and to figure things out and come up with ideas that I would have never thought of, or different avenues I wouldn't have thought of, and then kind of go down those roads and say, okay, what does that look like? So yeah,
it's good to using AI responsibly, Brian.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So like from an ABA perspective, if I was a business owner and I wanted to come up with marketing ideas or recruitment ideas, or what are some fun things I could do at the next ABA conference to get people to engage in my booth, or things like that are very much like, hey, let's just have a brainstorming session. It's a very good tool to kind of bounce ideas off of and have just a really conversation with, really.
The core thing that I'd recommend is just taking that first initial step and asking it your first few questions. Because, I mean, when you haven't quite played with it yet, it sounds a little scary. You're a little bit unsure. Is this thing kind of all it's cracked up to be? Just try it. It's free. It takes 2 seconds, chat.openai.com, and you can pop it in literally 2 seconds. And then once you ask it a couple of things, you see what it's great at, what it's not so good at. And then, Brian, to your point, I think all those ideas start popping in your head. Oh, what if I asked it this? Oh, what if I asked it this? And all of a sudden you realize, this thing's actually kind of awesome. It can actually help my day-to-day. And that's the cool aha moment.
I think another thing to think about too, though, is sometimes when you ask it a question, if you turn the question around and ask it in a different way, maybe, it's like, will these earrings look good on me, or will these earrings look bad on me? I don't know where I came up with that, but like completely gives you a different thing depending on how you ask the question. It's almost like it's looking for you to lead it to what you're thinking so that it can kind of be a yes man. And I just, so not only asking it different types of questions, but maybe asking the same questions in a different way, I think brings you some very interesting results.
100%.
Yeah, Zach, can you kind of dive into that, like the maybe the technology or the theory behind the prompts, like, and the importance of like having a good prompt versus a not so good prompt?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back to how the tech works and how these things understands what you're asking and then output answers is it's all based on math. It's what text has the AI that you're playing around with seen before, and then it's going to use that to take its best guess at what you want to see. So when you're prompting it, if you're asking it a question like, what's going on kind of tomorrow or the next day in Austin, Texas, it's basically going to look through a super general view of what might be happening, and it's going to give you your results. And then it's called prompting. It's basically adding more words to what you're asking it. You say, what's going on in Austin? I really like heavy metal rock. I really like going to basketball and football games. Is there anything kind of up my alley that might be interesting? Then all of a sudden you make it more personal and it gives you results that are much more tailored to you. So really kind of the key with prompting is, one, giving it as much relevant information as you can. And then number two is also trial and error. And the cool thing is, again, because it's free, if you ask it a question and it doesn't get it quite right, just ask it another one and another one until it gets to what you want.
And then I realize I always keep saying please and thank you.
Good idea.
Always.
No, you are on their side.
I always catch myself doing that. I feel bad if I don't say please and I just hit the button like I want this now. It doesn't feel right. You know? I always do that. I always catch myself. But maybe those are two different types of people. I don't feel like Zach. You're. I don't know. Do you say please or thank you in your prompts?
I do. With how much ChatGPT has helped me, I'd probably use it 85 times a day. I'd say please and thank you every time. It's been the best thing. The best thing. I'm very thankful.
Yeah. I always catch myself. We had another question come in. And it's mostly regarding a challenge of doing QA on session notes with RBTs to ensure the narrative is individualized. How can we use AI to promote treatment fidelity?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. When we're talking about individual requirements, we get asked about this all the time. And really what we find is that when your QA team is going through and figuring out if something meets a requirement, then it might be something like, is the narrative individualized? But really when you're actually going through the requirements mentally, you can break that up into a few different things that are a bit more objective. So usually individualized will mean something like mentions the client's name and not another client. Talks about specific goals that were worked on in the session, talks about a specific number of goals that were worked on in the session. And then you can add a couple more objective requirements to that to get to the end output of, was this individualized? But it's basically broken up into individual pieces.
Awesome.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
I think before we move on, there's one more that somebody asked in the chat where they can learn more. Do you have some resources that you can provide on how to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're interested in this topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now that
Absolutely. So you can check us out on our website. It's www.brellium, BRELLIUM.com. We're pretty active on LinkedIn and socials and stuff like that too. So you can pop around on our LinkedIn page where we share a bunch of content on kind of like what we talked about today, how stuff actually works under the hood, how we solve engineering problems, stuff like that. And then also I'm pretty available. I'll shoot my email in the chat. I love this stuff. It's really fun. So if you have any questions about how it works too, just let me know.
Yeah, I love your LinkedIn posts. They're really good. Like you really dive into AI and what it means and how you feel about it, and from a different angle, which I think is really refreshing. It's good.
Awesome. Thank you. I
really
always
like it.
love
Yeah, it's
feeling
good
that.
stuff.
Sometimes when I'm writing, I'm not quite sure what folks exactly want. So I'm glad to hear that you found them cool.
Well, yeah, I like when people write things about things they're passionate about, because you can tell it rolls off the tongue. It's very easy to talk about, and you can tell it's kind of just like stream of consciousness type of writing, which is the best kind. I think it's really easy to read. And then I'll also be sending out an email to everyone that showed up with a link to the slides if you want them. Also links to Brellium and all that good stuff, and all the emails. So
Thank you, Brian.
yes. Well, thanks for
Wonderful. And
thanks to Zach. Thanks for coming.
yes, thank you, Zach, for sharing your time.
I'm not letting you off the hook that easy.
I was just going to say, speaking of passion, nobody has more passion about selling, about doing demos for Motivity than Kara.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Very kind. Well, no, before I wanted to continue this for a minute, just because I know Brian and I were actually having a discussion earlier about the kind of insight that you can get from clinical data. And that's why I asked the question, because I just think there's so much interesting stuff that can come of it. And Brian, not to put you on the spot, but how do you see Motivity in the future and really clinical data collection in the future just changing and evolving as we have tools like AI at our disposal?
I mean, there's so much that it could be added from a product standpoint, if we're just talking about straight up product. Sorry, my dog's interested. I mean, it could be anywhere from kind of what we touched on earlier, which is more predictive modeling based off of raw data. It could be suggestions of things like prompts. It could be, like we talked about, summarization of session notes. It could be what Brellium does to the nth degree. Yeah, I mean, I think suggestions of things like interventions is a huge one, and I really like that one. Even with prompts and suggestions of things like that. To where, again, I think Zach made a really good point that this isn't taking your job. It's another tool in your tool belt, you know.
And we're supposed to be pulling from the literature, and it does. I mean, pull from the literature because it's out there. So that's something we're supposed to be doing. It's just kind of helping us do that. We aren't supposed to be coming up with interventions all by ourselves. We're supposed to be looking at research.
Brian, I'm going to share a little mock-up that you made, again, to put you on the spot.
Oh boy.
I think this is so interesting to me. I'm a BCBA, and probably many people on the call are too. But I think something like this, it really goes along with what Zach was talking about, that it's your assistant. It's telling you where to look and pointing at what to do next. It's not necessarily telling you what to do or how to do an intervention, which would be frightening. But I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is all based off our Acuity grant, one of the NIH grants that we're currently working on. This one looks at raw data and finds things like spikes and plateaus and dosage not being met, things like that. And it's an alert-driven system that can notify the clinician of things that should be looked at. And that's strictly just based off of
personally that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So you don't need to go one by one. Yeah.
Right. In this case, and of course, then there's the human part that comes in, that human element and that clinician expertise. But it's that assistant that it's, I only have 5 minutes before I have to get on to my next thing, that I want to look to see how everything is going. So being able to have that brought to my attention is amazing. And then the next piece. Can you talk a little bit to this?
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. So this one is kind of based off of projections and goals, and it's how close you are to your projections that you kind of written out in your treatment plan, and how close are you to achieving those objectives, and what do you need to change, or how, what needs to be done in order to kind of meet those objectives and those goals that you set previously. So again, this is kind of using some modeling based off of, let's say, like how many goals you set in your treatment plan, what the baseline assessments were, and kind of the date that you wanted to get and to achieve these certain things, and trying to find a path and seeing what your actual is versus what the expected is. And that if you continue on a path that you're currently on, where do we see you finishing up versus what can you do to make the change to actually make those goals, or do those goals need to be changed? So that's kind of what we're showing here.
That's super cool. To kind of segue into Motivity, and also I want to pull Brellium into this too. So Zach, you're not off the hook either. But what really stands out to me about Motivity is we are not trying to replicate anything that's already out there. We are on the cusp of innovation and looking at how can we reimagine clinical data collection? How can we make intervention as effective as it can be? Even when I was just at the CAST conference, so one of the really big topics of conversation was 60% of BCBAs that are in the field right now have less than 5 years of experience. So how do we provide some kind of support for them, even through the software, so that they can still deliver really effective intervention? So I see so much utility for the use of an assistant like AI, and then using something that is really forward thinking like Motivity to really, even with these new BCBAs, to continue a high level of quality. Now, if anyone's interested, I'll show you a little quick demo of Motivity. And the piece that I really wanted to point out today, because I think it is really relevant to our conversation, is our session note approval workflow and how the audit is kind of built into the system. And then Zach, I'd be interested to know if somebody were using maybe Motivity along with Brellium, how would that transfer happen? Then what might Brellium do to even automate and audit the process further? Does that sound okay? All right. All right, cool. So I am going to open up my Motivity session right now. So again, just quick overview, Motivity is 100% clinical data collection. We integrate with practice management systems. We are always integrating with more systems so that you can use Motivity as your clinical tool and then use any other ABA software, such as all these amazing ones that are popping up onto the market right now, along with Motivity. So I am in a session right now. I'm going to just collect some data really quickly. As I navigate through, you'll see that really the standout of Motivity is that you are creating your interface to look however it is that you might want, whether it's custom prompting or it's just a simple pass-fail. If you want to have your automations built in, so if you have your baseline set up and then you want to transition based on different criteria, that is all baked into the back end of the program. So it's pretty awesome. Everything saves on Motivity right away, and then it also graphs right away. So you'll see that instantly the data that I just collected are already there. I have all of my information that I entered in and so on. But the piece I really want to focus on right now is that session note. So you'll see that I do have my session note docked on the side of the screen. On Motivity, you can build just about anything using our template builder, whether that is a session note for obviously your payer requirements. You can build treatment plans, progress reports, supervision notes, incident reports, caregiver communication logs, you name it. Really anything clinical, all the way from intake to discharge, you can build and store on Motivity. This particular session note, it is pulling in a lot of automated fields based on how this note is set up on the back end, including auto pulling in all of our data. this note is live up to the point of signature. So for example, if my learner starts engaging in a tantrum and I start that timer right there, you'll see that this tantrum is beginning to track. So up until the point of signature, this note is live and everything will be pulled in. Now, this narrative right here, this is one of the really nice features of Motivity that I think really stands out for training purposes, is you can put in guardrails. So let's say you have a new RBT that does not know how to fill out a session note, and you're just working on teaching them about the importance of demonstrating medical necessity. You can build in drop downs into your note. You can indicate required fields. So that, you know, they have to fill out these pieces before they're able to submit it. You can also put in multi-select. So all of these tools are available to you when you are building out your templates. We do have a lot of customers that will have multiple versions of the same note. So maybe they'll have one that they assign to an RBT in training, one that they assign to an RBT that captures the same data, but maybe has a little bit more open narrative. And then for a senior RBT, maybe it's more free form. So that's a really nice way to build in that support and training as you are going to make sure that your session notes you know, reduce the amount of headache and time to get them to look the way you want. Every note you can build in your approval process, however you need it for the specific payer. This one does require a parent signature, so I can collect that signature, you know, on the device if I have my parent with me, or I can route it to their Motivity account and they can log in on their end and sign. This one does also require a behavior technician signature. Again, this is all customizable, so you're matching your organization's workflow on any of these notes. This also has a geolocation, very cool. From that end, I am now done with this note. I'm going to end my session. I did not track any of these this session, so I'm going to go ahead and end this. Now, here comes that really nice approval process. This is one of my favorite features on Motivity. If I come in as a supervisor, I will see that there is one note awaiting my approval. I can take a look through and see exactly what was filled out. I can either go ahead and approve this note or I can reject it. And here's the moment of aha. You can put in exactly why this note was rejected. So I can say here, please add another reinforcer and re-sign the note. From here, I submit the note, and when my RBT logs in their queue, they're going to see that they have a revision request. So I do not have to find this person in person. I do not have to send them an email. It is right all here in Motivity. When they log in, they're going to see exactly why it was rejected. So it says, please add another reinforcer, re-sign the note. Got it. I can come here. I can add in that we also did high fives. And this note does require a re-signature, but again, you don't have to put that in if you don't need it. You'll see that everything is replaced, but if we go to the history of the note, the history is stored here. So in case of an audit, you have your original, you have your revision with all of the notes and everything that was changed. So again, as the supervisor, I could come in, I could see that my RBT, I can remind myself, what did I actually want them to do? I can check that they did it, looks great, approve it and submit. And now what happens is if you are using an integrated partner, the note would get sent over to that integrated partner. In the case of a practice management partner, it closes out the appointment. It appends the note and all that data to the appointment so that billing can commence. But what I am very curious to hear is, Zach, how would this work with Brellium? What would be the next step?
Yeah, I mean, the key point is that second check done by a supervisor, you wouldn't have to do that either period or as much anymore. So basically those requirements that the supervisor or someone on the ops side might be given the RBT note a once over for, you could just pop those into Brellium once, and then RBTs would know exactly what they got to fix without having to spend other folks' time going through it.
That's really cool. So yeah, so basically the supervisor does not have to log in and make all those notes. The RBT would get that information from Brellium.
That's correct. Yeah. So just
Right.
pop back notifications.
How much
okay,
time? That's so cool. How much time do you find that your clients are saving? I don't know if you actually have a data estimate.
It varies like super widely depending on how large the center is. In the dozens of hours at under, let's say, 25 clients, and it'll literally be up to thousands of hours a month for some of our big centers.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I think Brellium would kind of take the role of doing that rejection and approval process, to where they would just kind of like loop right into that flow, and we'd be able to send it off to them, and they would send it back to say rejection because of this, right? And it would just flow right into our system the way it would. So I think that would be really nice. Yeah.
Well, if anyone's interested to be our beta tester, let us know.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Zach, for joining us.
Absolutely. You guys for having me. This was
showing us
fun.
all your cool toys. And Kara for sharing a demo, but and everybody for sticking around and talking about it and being interested in the first place.
I'm going to put our Motivity website too, so if anyone wants to reach out to learn more. As you can tell, I love chatting with people, so please reach out and we'll chat more.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate all your time. Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Kath. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care,
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.